The movie begins with the teenage-aged Clay using sign language to articulate to Linda from a non-contact visit area of a prison. He's deaf from birth and now without a father. He tells about himself in a storied manner and how he's been waiting in futility for someone whom he knows would never come back. Clay mentions how his dad was shot in the stomach, causing his demise. He says he's not alone in this sad story and talks about Walter's heartbreaking story too. Walter's twin sister was and her used a brick to hit her head 8 times. After she passed on, the perpetrator tried to body to avoid being caught, but couldn't go on with that. He left the body by the edge of the river. While Clay gives the narration, Walter is seen working out intensely and getting his body into a finely built shape. He is running through the streets and lifting heavy metals, as if he is preparing for war. At the end of his workout and a brief pause of Clay's storytelling, Walter's facial expression turns into one of intense anger. Walter now wears a cop costume and is ready to go out to work. The last thought in his head is the body of his late sister lying unclad by the riverbank. This scene has never left his mind since the appalling incident that ravaged his family took place. He gathers himself and steps out into the streets to work. His job is to wear a cop costume and share flyers. After the day's job, Walter joins his mom's support group at the request of his mom. The method the support group uses is that every member makes a reconstruction book of their lost loved one and shares their experiences with that. At the support group is Linda, Clay's mom, who's a member. Hank introduces her to share her experience, and she begins. She talks about how she met Larry, her husband. She shares a few of Larry's history and mentions Larry's drinking habit that stopped him from doing some things he loved doing. Aside from drinking, Larry collects guns too. He has friends who do the same. Larry and his friends would also take Clay to the shooting range, and Clay loved his father. On one night of drinking with his friends, he got shot by Mark, a friend of his. It's Gloria, Walter's mom's turn. She shares the reconstruction book she has made for Annie, Walter's sister. Gloria talks about the birth of the kids and mentions that Annie left her little daughter Beth behind, who now lives with them. The case to unravel the mystery behind Annie's passing is on. Tom, a friend and an admirer of Annie, is being tried for the murder of Annie. Tom's attorney argues that Tom was only an admirer and constantly walks her home at night, but that isn't enough to pin her murder on Tom. The attorney reminds everyone that Annie's lifestyle suggests that she was involved with many men and also loves taking alcohol. He argues that this would have made Annie susceptible to being prey to other people. While all these arguments go on, Walter is at the door of the courtroom, peeping at the proceeding. Walter would always run by the riverside where his sister's body was dumped and sometimes made the sign of the cross there. This was a way for him to keep his anger burning. But to what end? At the courtroom lobby, Walter makes himself available, but doesn't take his eyes off Tom. At the end of the proceeding, the attorney explains to him that his scare-looking gesture is only making things difficult for the case. He advises that Walter loosen up and let off some steam before coming to court. Just at one corner of the lobby, Linda is meeting her attorney. When she's done with her attorney, she sees Walter and calls out to him. She tries to smoke a cigarette, but quickly remembers that she's in a no-smoking area. She mentions that she's there for the jury selection, after which Walter leaves. While Walter goes about his job in the streets, she meets with Linda, who doesn't care what Walter has to say. Linda, who doesn't know it's Walter's in the costume, tells him off. They are at the support group and the moderator tells them how the justice system works. He says that the probability of their suspects not getting what they deem as the appropriate judgment is very high. He encourages them to attend a function where money will be raised for families of murdered victims. In the next court proceeding, Tom's attorney constantly reiterates his stance that Annie was promiscuous and indeed didn't know who Beth's dad was. This riles Walter up, who started objecting, disturbing the peace of the proceeding. After the judge's warning, Walter storms out of the courtroom. Just outside the courtroom is Linda, seated. She beckons on Walter to know what transpired. Walter laments how demeaning Tom and his attorney have been towards Annie, and even lying, just to prove their point. While Linda takes a walk with Walter, she confesses how the court looks very alien to her. Walter tells her that he was a wrestler with the national team in Iowa before this tragedy happened, and he had to come back. Linda thinks a 24-year-old shouldn't stick around and should go have a life. Walter thinks it's best he sticks around though, only to see the case through. Walter reveals his job as the guy with the chicken costume, and Linda apologizes for telling him off earlier. She infers that Walter gives off a sad demeanor while he does his job. Linda says she works at the community center. She started the job after Larry was shot. When Walter asks, Linda doesn't say much about her likeness for her job. She whips out a cigarette and offers Walter, who politely turns the offer down. Wrestlers don't smoke. Walter is seen using a gym. He lifts a very heavy weight that gets him stranded midway. The trainer comes and helps him out. The trainer hands over a copy of the key to the place to Walter. He's reminded about the upcoming competition, but he says he's not wrestling anymore. This surprises the coach, who wonders why he's been training intensely for a while now, but Walter doesn't reply. At the gym, Walter can see the outside. He notices Clay is being assaulted by his classmates, and this surprises him. The mean kid pokes him to get a reaction. Walter approaches them and starts yelling at the meanie to refrain. Before he gets in close proximity, Clay makes a fist and lands a heavy blow on the meanie, sending him to the ground. He pounces on the meanie and begins punching him. A guy tries to pull Clay off, but Clay resists and pushes him away, making him stagger a bit. Walter runs over again and pulls Clay off the meanie. As Walter takes the meanie away, Clay pulls out a gun. He points it at the meanie, who now has a bloodied nose and mouth. Walter calmly prevails over Clay to hand the gun over to him. After a moment of contemplation from Clay, he hands over the gun to him. That was about to go down south pretty fast. Much later, Walter is seen telling Linda what transpired. Linda is disappointed with Clay for pulling out a gun. She tells Clay off vocally, but it falls on deaf ears, literally. Linda isn't ready to let the issue slide and goes to Clay in his room. Linda starts shouting and explaining to Clay why he shouldn't be pulling guns randomly. While they are on that, Walter is skimming through an art book. Linda comes and tells him to refrain from doing that. Walter wants to know what Clay is doing with a gun, and Linda says it's Larry's, but that doesn't answer his questions as he presses further. Linda promises to do something about it and worries about how she'd manage Clay and the trial coming up. Walter gestures at the need for the gun to be taken away and takes his leave. As Walter walks home, he meets Bryce, Annie's fiancé, who wants them to go have a beer. Walter doesn't want that. Bryce tells Walter he now has a fiancé who's pregnant for him and wants to marry her, before stating his reasons for meeting him. He offers to give Walter a job, but Walter refuses. He then requests that they get Annie's ring back for him, as he can't afford to buy another one for his new fiancé. Walter says nothing, but gives an agitated expression before walking inside. In the house, Walter meets her mom, who tells him her plans to sell Annie's record collections. Walter isn't interested in that at the moment, as he searches for his sweatshirt. He finds out that Beth has helped in doing the laundry, but his sweatshirt was ruined in the process. He's vexed, and Gloria quickly tells him it's time he goes back to Iowa. She cites that Annie would have wanted him to move on with his life. Walter thinks his mom is embarrassed by him, but she refutes it. He tells his mom Annie would want things to be right, hence him staying behind. He tells his mom about his encounter with Bryce, and she shows him where the ring is. Walter is in Beth's room and looking keenly at the ring when Beth enters. They have a little chat, and Walter picks her up and plants a kiss on her forehead. The next day, Walter is at his workplace when Linda comes to him. She tries to talk but is in discomfort and asks Walter to take off the mask, which he does. She offers that they go get coffee, but Walter turns it down. He says as a wrestler, he avoids taking coffee too. There's a way out though. He's fine with Linda taking coffee while he watches on. Over coffee, Linda appreciates Walter for his role in Clay's gun-wielding issue. She apologizes for not having handled the whole matter well. Walter wants to know what's next for and with Clay. Linda says the city put Clay in a special program, but they both think the program would be more detrimental to Clay, as it has to do with gunshots and deceased people. Linda tells Walter to come with her to the wedding she's attending the next week. This surprises Walter, but Linda quickly explains it's not a date. She cries at weddings non-stop and needs someone to accompany her. Walter at first is confused, but eventually smiles, affirming his decision to accompany her. It's the wedding day. Walter and Linda are seen dressing up in their respective houses. They wear matching colors, even as Walter shows a little bit of discomfort wearing a suit. Suits might also be on the long list of don't for wrestlers. Both of them meet at a point. Linda is impressed with Walter's dress. They talk a little, then proceed inside. While they take their walk inside, Linda tells him all he needs to know about the occasion and the couple. While the bride sings for the groom, Linda begins crying. Walter nudges her to stop crying, but she can't. Crying at weddings has become a part of her. As she continues crying, she draws the attention of guests. She reaches the crux of her tears when the groom joins the bride in taking the last lines of the song. Walter doesn't know how to react, so he taps her thighs hard in a bid to nudge her to stop. This makes Linda react by poking Walter with her elbow. The nudge from Walter repeats itself, this time very hard, and Linda nudges him in return. This back and forth continues for a while as they laugh and goof around. While guests dance and marry, Walter just stands like a toddler waiting for instructions. Linda sees this and walks up to him to shake him up. He insists he isn't having a hard time but is watching the people have fun. Linda wants to know if he has ever been married, or even close to being married. Well, his life has revolved only around wrestling. So, no, he's never been anywhere near getting married or been married. While they talk, a guest asks Linda for a dance. While they hit the dance floor, Walter goes back to his almost confused state. His demeanor changes the moment Linda begins dancing. He almost lets out a smile. He then imagines himself on the dance floor giving off some moves. Now on a bus, on their way back from the wedding, they talk about how interesting the wedding was. She apologizes for being drunk, and Walter apologizes for stealing a look at her drawing book the other day. Linda is fine with it. Walter expresses his likeness for the drawings. They drive past a young boy throwing stones and bottles at a building, shattering the windows. Linda notices it's Clay and alights from the bus. She makes Clay stop the act and explains to Walter that it's the former residence of the man who shot Larry. Walter then walks both of them home. Walter thinks he can help Clay. He tells Linda to make sure Clay meets up with him at the gym on Monday before he goes to school. Linda trusts Walter, so she agrees. At Gloria's place, she tells Walter he went on a date with Linda. Walter wouldn't totally agree it was a 100% date, but she's more concerned about Walter mingling and is happy Walter is making friends. She wants Walter to help her with cleaning the garage so she can host the support group for the rummage sales, and Walter agrees. She continues staring at Walter in a way that suggests she's happy Walter is about to start seeing someone. Walter takes Clay to the gym and registers him there. He thinks wrestling would help Clay, as it helped him when he was Clay's age. In the courtroom, Tom's mom confirms that at the time of the murder of Annie, Tom was with her at home. This further confuses Walter, who turns to look at Bryce. At his workplace, Walter's cleaning when Bryce walks in. He informs Walter that his fiancée accepted his proposal. He's there to invite Walter and Gloria to the wedding, as he thinks it's just proper that they are part of the wedding. Walter, with a bewildered expression, accepts. After they shake hands and Bryce leaves, Walter's thoughts are clouded by why Bryce keeps coming back to them. At the gym, with Linda watching, Clay has his first wrestling training session. The trainer confirms to Walter that Clay is picking up. Linda isn't too sure about Clay wrestling, but Walter assures that he'll do well. He advises Clay to get a hot water bath before sleeping, and Linda thanks him. Walter never fails in his tradition of going to the spot where Annie's body was found, and he does that once again. It's court day, and the jury starts that deliberation. While Linda and Walter talk outside, the attorney informs Walter that the jury will take a break and continue the next week. It's all a part of how things work. Still at the court premises, it's the weekend, and Linda deems it fit to invite Walter for another wedding. Walter stares at Linda for a long, as if trying to gauge if Linda is real. He finally assures Linda he'll love to go with her. Proceedings for Larry's case are starting soon, and she excuses herself. At the wedding, Linda informs Walter that she'd be helping Bryce and her fiancé set up their wedding. While the guests dance, the bride beckons on Linda to come join. She wants Walter to dance too, but Walter doesn't dance. So did Larry. The party is over, and Walter is helping Linda clear out the place. After Linda tells him he has a right to decline to come with her, he explains that he loves going with her to weddings, and he always has a lot of fun there. Linda clarifies that his kind of fun is peculiar to her, and they laugh. It's a moment of truth. Linda explains how much older she is. She stops talking, walks very close to Walter, and looks straight into his eyes, even as Walter does the same. She takes Walter's hands and places them on her hips. In a split second, she starts kissing Walter. While they kiss, Walter starts rubbing her hips and bum. He stops midway, but Linda asks him to go on. She likes the feeling and wants it to continue. Walter continues, and both of them have a good time. Now at Linda's place, Linda brings out Larry's gun and tries to hand it over to Walter to keep. She doesn't want the gun around the house with Clay in it. Walter doesn't agree in the first place, but later accepts. A mild kissing session ensues, while Clay watches the whole episode from a door opening. Linda confesses that she hasn't had any intimate relationship with anyone since Larry passed on. They continue kissing but identify a need to stop. It's time for Walter to go home, so they bid goodnight and Walter leaves. At the gym, Walter is giving personal lessons to Clay. The two of them have a good time together. The training gets a bit too intense for Clay, who shows Walter the middle finger and walks off the training court. As they walk home, Walter apologizes and goes on to talk about how he found out about Annie's tragedy and how the incident has reshaped his life. It's trial day. The judge finds Mark guilty of taking Larry's life. This makes Linda happy, who then gestures to Clay that they've gotten justice. They are home, and Linda is all over Walter, kissing and making sexual moves. While Walter schemes through Linda's drawing book, Clay walks in on him. He uses sign language to tell him that Linda loves him, but he doesn't understand what Clay is saying. As soon as he tries to hand a note to Clay to pen down his message, Clay throws his hand in frustration and walks away. It's the judgment day for Annie's case. Gloria declines to go. She thinks the judgment, no matter the outcome, wouldn't change anything. Now in the courtroom, Linda and Clay are there to support Walter. The jury finds Tom not guilty of murder. Now that's a twist no one was expecting. While Walter walks through the lobby of the court, Linda runs to him to console him. He wants to be alone, and Linda understands that. She kisses him on the cheek and leaves him alone. As Walter looks at Clay, Clay gestures that he could use the gun to get justice. At Gloria's place, a man pays for Annie's records, and as he carries them away, she changes her mind. She isn't selling again. She walks up to the man and demands he return the records. With Walter now in the compound, the man disagrees. After a moment of back and forth, and with Gloria hitting Hanks with an umbrella, Gloria changes her mind again. She allows the man to go with the records. After she gets emotional and cries, she asks Walter to know how the judgment went, and she gets the news. Tom was found not guilty. Sad day for Walter and his family again. On a certain day, Walter is seen watching Tom's mom as she enters an apartment. While at work, Linda comes and tells Walter that Clay has gotten into university. He's wrestling later that day and has asked that Walter attend. Walter agrees, and Linda leaves. Walter, who's now wearing his chicken suit, sees Tom and approaches him with the flyers he shares. He is weird towards Tom, and Tom looks for a way to escape, while Walter follows him. It's time for Clay's wrestling match. Linda and Walter are there. Clay is having a hard time with the match as he's easily brought to the ground by his opponent. Walter goes close to the ring and encourages him to do better. At the end of the day, Clay wins the match. He's very happy and goes over to hug Walter. Back at home and on Linda's bed, she expresses her joy in seeing Clay happy for the first time in a long while. Linda goes on to express how much she'd like to continue the relationship he and Walter currently have. He hopes Walter doesn't disappear, as even Clay likes him too. She explains further that it's more of a love affair than a like affair. Walter is ready to take the laws into his own hands. He takes the gun from Linda and goes over to Tom's house. He makes Tom come out, and he starts beating him. After a session of serious beatings, and Tom pleading his innocence, he pulls the gun on Tom. Tom constantly mentions that he is her friend. His plea doesn't fall on deaf ears as Walter lowers the gun. As Tom sees that Walter is calm and not willing to shoot him again, he promises he won't tell anyone what has just transpired. He begs to leave, and he runs off. As Walter looks in a direction, he sees Clay peeping at him. He yells at Clay to go away, as he's weak and frustrated. Walter is at the gym, and the pictures from Annie's final scene keep flashing to him. This fuels his anger, and he pours out the frustration on the weight he's lifting. It doesn't go as planned as he can't lift the weight. He drops it scantily and gets up angrily. Walter is told of how different people were questioned about Annie's murder, but there wasn't substantial evidence to pin it on Tom. It is now evidently clear that Tom didn't hurt Annie. Walter is now at work, sitting dejected. Linda comes and notices this and goes on to give him some encouragement. He tells Annie that Tom isn't responsible for what happened to Annie, and that Tom was only helping her out. He continues crying and regrets why he wasn't there to help his sister. As Linda consoles him, she promises to help and be there for him. At that moment, Walter asks Linda what they are. He thinks that they are both sad reminders of their sad memories, as they are brought together by sad incidents. Linda thinks Walter is scared that she intends to use him to pass the time. Walter says that isn't the case, and reveals that he's going back to Iowa. As Linda stands and looks on, Walter leaves. At home, Walter meets Beth and tells her the story of how Annie would crawl to his bed when he falls asleep. He says it only stopped when Gloria bought something that would make Annie sleep in her room. Walter thinks it's time the gift is passed on to Beth. As he talks, Beth isn't paying attention. As he calls her attention, Beth stands up and walks out, to Walter's surprise. Clay meets up with Walter and is begging him not to leave, but Walter can't understand a thing Clay is saying. Walter advises him to keep wrestling, and he'll be great. Clay leaves devastated. Walter begins sorting out every pending thing before he leaves, as he returns Larry's gun to Linda. Linda can't hold off her tears, as Clay consoles her. It's Bryce's wedding day. Linda enters the venue and sees Walter as one of Bryce's best men. She immediately exits the hall. As she sketches in her drawing book outside the hall, Walter walks up to her. She begins telling Walter how her life has been and how long she has settled for less all her life. She says she loves her current location and would love to raise her son there. She reaffirms her love for Walter and promises to take good care of him if only he allows her. She expresses how good he has been to her and Clay. She really wishes that Walter didn't have to go. She apologizes for being sad, but reveals she's just letting her feelings known to Walter before he leaves. She gives Walter a kiss on the cheek and leaves. Walter is back in the party, and all he thinks of are scenes of the time spent with Linda. The next day, Clay collects the gun and leaves the house. Linda thinks Clay is about to do something dangerous. She meets Walter and tells him this. Walter immediately knows where Clay is heading off to and runs there. Clay, who is holding a gun, is at Tom's place. As Tom and his mom reach their residence, Clay points the gun at them. Walter starts screaming at Clay to stop him from shooting, but he doesn't hear. He misses with his first shot. The second shot finds Walter's leg as he rushes to save Tom from the shot. Walter is now lying almost unconscious on the ground as Clay cries, seeing the damage he has done. We're back to the scene from the beginning, when Linda and Clay communicate in the non-contact visit area of the prison. The gun incident is the reason Clay is in a correctional center. He continues talking about how the story isn't just about him. Linda is seen folding some clothes and smoking, while Walter, with a leg brace, is seen outside, taking out the trash. They wave at each other and share a smile. It seems Walter has given in to allow Linda to take care of him.